Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the ICC International Trade and Prosperity Week. We are on day 2 today, talking about climate action and sustainability. Could I just remind everybody of some of the conversation yesterday on day 1, where we had a number of themes running through the day that are very relevant to this morning's session, particularly on the importance of collective action between industry and government and wider stakeholders. Also on the value of partnerships between different stakeholders to drive that climate collective action, and the importance, of course, of net zero, both in terms of the opportunity that it creates to drive up productivity, increase efficiency, and create growth with lots of business opportunities around the world. So this session is extremely relevant as our first session after yesterday. This morning's session will be on collective action to deliver net zero, innovative approaches. And I'm delighted to say that our first speaker is Natasha Condon, Global Head of Trade at JP Morgan. Over to you, Natasha.
Thanks very much, Chris, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. You will probably be relieved to hear that I'm not going to speak for too long. I'm going to just take a moment to try to put this conversation into context, and talk a little bit about where we are as an industry, and obviously particularly with a little bit of flavour from my side as a trade finance banker. And then obviously we're going to go to the panel, and you're going to hear some industry experts dig into some of these topics in a lot more detail. So when I think we have been talking about the environmental impact of trade and trade finance, and this often gets put into a general bucket of ESG, environmental, social and governance, though obviously this specific topic is around environment in particular. I think it's pretty obvious to all of us that we have seen an enormous increase in interest in this topic in the last year or two. And if you stop to think for a moment about the different motivations and the sort of the drivers for that, I think that's often quite useful as a place to start this conversation. So from my perspective, talking to corporates around the world in particular about their environmental performance and how they think about their contribution to reducing carbon emissions, a lot of this started with the consumer. Consumers and companies that serve consumers anywhere along the supply chain, those companies have been worrying about this topic for a while, because the general public got concerned around this perhaps a little bit, frankly, before business and industry did. And it's very clear, you know, we've all seen probably horror stories in the press around companies that have perhaps, you know, caused a PR disaster, or have managed to put something out there that their consumers did not like. And in the age of digital and social media, just how quickly that can have an impact on your bottom line. So even apart from the obvious ethical drivers to get this done, I think consumer companies were in many ways ahead of the game here, and have been thinking for a long time around how they report sustainability and how they are improving their own performance, and also how they're accounting for that to the street. The other sort of big private sector pressure, I think, is coming from investors. Again, we've probably all seen, you know, in the press, some of the big fossil fuel companies and the pressure they're coming under from activist investors. And that pressure is very much focused on one thing, which is the carbon transition. And it's got one very specific goal, which is to speed that up. And so you've seen many times, I think, in the press in the last year or so, investors coming in and saying, okay, you know, you have set a carbon reduction target, but it's not aggressive enough. We want to see bigger reductions. We want to see more aggressive timelines. That's what the street wants to see from particularly, I think, corporates that are seen as having a significant fossil fuel interest. And you've seen the reaction to that from large companies moving increasingly fast to kind of satisfy that kind of demand. What I do think is worth highlighting in the last 12 months in particular has been the public sector, and the extent to which the regulatory cavalry has kind of come over the horizon in this space. Some regulators have always been pretty active in trying to drive carbon transition in their economies. I think, you know, the EU in particular has been very public about their intention to be a beacon of carbon transition in the world. But, you know, it's by no means limited to, this isn't just a European conversation. The US has gone back into the Paris Accords. The government of China, for example, has made some fairly ambitious statements about what they want to do with their economy in terms of carbon transition. And there's been some stuff in the press around, you can see the impact that's having already on, for example, the financing that some Chinese banks are comfortable to offer to different projects around the world. So on the one hand, regulators are starting to push. They're also starting to require more data on what's being financed and what the underlying goods are in a trade. And that, of course, has an impact on me as a trade finance banker and anybody else out there who provides a similar service. More information is going to be required of us in future. We're going to need to take into account more the carbon impact of the financing that we provide, the underlying transaction. And that's a data need, which can only possibly be met by improved digitization, and can only possibly be met by increased standardization, I think, of some of the data fields that we all deal with every day. You know, if I'm financing a transaction for solar panels and I'm defining a solar panel slightly differently to the next guy, we're going to have a problem with the regulators. So there is a lot of work, I think, that needs to be done in the industry collectively to come up with standards here. And this is also true when you get into the space of green trade finance, if you like, or trade finance that is explicitly intended to serve a green purpose. There are no standards out there in the industry right now. That's causing challenges for everyone. You see different approaches out in the market. You see people trying to apply the UN Sustainable Development Goals as an impartial standard for what might count as green trade. And JP Morgan has a development finance institution that uses that standard to qualify transactions. Other banks have announced publicly that they might try to apply, for example, the LMA green loan standards to a trade deal. And that's a perfectly logical and sensible approach, in my opinion. It's just that the LMA green loan standards were not designed for trade finance, and so they work up to a point. But I think there's a very clear recognition in the industry that we need standards sooner rather than later that everyone can accept and recognize. And we all saw what happened when the green loan standards came out. The volume of green loans that were being done in the world went through the roof. And hopefully that will happen in the same way with green trade finance as soon as we have some standards to apply. The other thing I wanted just to mention briefly as context to this conversation is when we talk about the public sector response, as well as the regulators, we should also talk about the agencies, the multilaterals, such as, you know, the IFC or EBRD, ADB, any of the sort of the big multilaterals that are out there supporting trade, and particularly trade for the emerging markets. Because, you know, it's been discussed a lot in the press, I think, that carbon transition, by definition, it requires investment. And it's obviously going to be more difficult in some ways for emerging markets who do not necessarily find it as easy to put up that kind of investment. And the challenge, of course, is that as the public sector starts to try to reduce its support for fossil fuel exports, you know, and all of these agencies are trying to move, you know, slowly away from fossil fuels and towards renewables. That runs the risk that we as developed markets are inflicting the sort of the consequences of that on the emerging markets who find it harder to make that investment. And so again, as a trade finance bank, I really want the industry to think about how are we going to support that transition? And in particular, how are we going to support that transition in emerging markets so that they don't end up carrying the weight of the work that's got to be done? So with that, I think it would be much more interesting to get into some industry experts and talk about what's practically being done out there. So Chris, let me hand back to you for the panel.
Many thanks, Natasha. Anyone who knows ICC, you'll know the role we play around trade finance. This is an incredibly relevant conversation. JP Morgan's there right at the heart of that conversation across the ICC family. Just before I hand over to our moderator, Juergen Maier, if you'd like to just jump into the chat room, there's a live discussion going on right now, or post your questions, please do so. We'll also be using the hashtag ICC ITPW21 on social media and LinkedIn. So please do join the conversation, share your thoughts and insights, and I will now hand over to Juergen Maier, who's chair of the Digital Catapult. Yesterday we heard from the high value Manufacturing Catapult. From Catherine Bennett today, we have Juergen Maier from the Digital Catapult, and also a board member of the International Chamber of Commerce in the UK. Over to you, Juergen.
Thank you very much, Chris, for that introduction, and thank you to you, Natasha, also for your introduction. And Natasha will join us once each panelist has introduced themselves. We've done a little bit of Q&A, then we'll open it up to Q&A to all of you, as Chris just said. So please, throughout the panel, don't wait till the end. Throughout the panel, ask your questions, and Natasha, I look forward to you joining us when we get into that Q&A as well. Also great to hear, Natasha, that the pressure is on, that investors are helping apply more of that pressure, not before time, I've got to say, and indeed that the regulators are applying more pressure also. But I think we all know we're heading into COP26 as we speak, and you know, it doesn't seem so long ago since the Paris Agreement in 2014, and I think all of us feel that more urgency is required, and it can only be done in partnership between policymakers, regulators, industry and innovators, and investors and finance. So I'm delighted that we've got a great panel of financiers, regulators, and very importantly, business that needs to manage the transformation. So without further ado, let me hand over and introduce our first panelist, who is Anne-Maria Rugarli, is the Vice President of Corporate Sustainability at JTI, the global tobacco but diversifying company, I think, and very interested to hear from you, Anna-Maria, how you at JTI are managing and accelerating your transition to net zero. Thank you, Anna, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this kind introduction. Indeed, JTI is Japan Tobacco International, and is part of a bigger group that's called JT. And we also have a pharma and food business. So as you said, is a diversified group. I'm representing JTI, and I just joined them as the new Vice President for Corporate Sustainability. I'm working really hard on our environmental programs, and obviously in terms of our contribution to net zero. As a fully vertically integrated business, JTI again is very committed to reducing our greenhouse gases emissions at every step in our supply chain. We obviously fully support the Paris Agreement on climate change, and we're aiming at achieving net zero carbon emissions from our own operations. Critical to protecting the environment is, as you said, and you already hinted, is to align with the United Nations Guiding Principles framework, which applies to countries, to states, and to businesses. And the call has been to create stronger bonds and stronger partnerships at that level between different parts of society to make sure that we can all contribute to this very important challenge that we're facing. I mean, climate change is an emergency that we're all dealing with. One of the points I'd like to make is the fact that some industries are excluded from being able to partner at that level, and that this doesn't help really all of us to contributing and to really playing a role that we can play, because climate change is affecting all of us as industries. So to address climate change and with the net zero race, governments and corporations have to collaborate much more strongly. The last point I'd like to make is around the relevance of regulation that must encourage investments in alternative energy resources and keep producer responsibility costs to a reasonable and proportionate level, to allow spending on research development and on innovation, and to really kind of look for the longer term wins that we need to accelerate and to run our contribution at a much faster pace. So these elements are really important for us to be able to fully contribute in a positive way towards achieving net zero.
Thank you very much, Anna Maria. And maybe just probe into a couple of things that you just said there. I mean, you obviously said that regulation is required to help you as a corporate, as a company, making the right sorts of investments in renewable energy. I mean, that's one of the prerequisites. What other sorts of prerequisites do you think are required to help you as JTI on your net zero journey?
I think, first of all, is one of the prerequisites is acceptance, and that means we need a much stronger buy-in from top leadership and commitment from businesses within the whole value chain towards net zero. Again, as I said, this is one of the major issues that we have in terms of making sure that we're able to decarbonize our value chain, and that requires strong commitment really from everybody. The second part is the fact that we need investments in innovative solutions, as I said, and really shifting business models to source renewable electricity and generating energy from low carbon sources. So this is a very important step in ensuring that we're all able to contribute, because right now, the investments are not always at the level that is needed, or don't come at the pace, with the sense of urgency that is needed. So transition finance, which is something that we just mentioned, is going to help companies transition towards net zero emissions. And it is a vital part of the fight trying to combat climate change, really. And again, as I said, regulations should incentivize the innovation from a business perspective rather than kind of governments trying to levy more taxes. It's really important that we're able to keep investing to find innovative solutions. And governments should provide clear and consistent regulatory guidance. I think these are really the prerequisites in terms of us being able to keep contributing positively towards net zero.
Yes, indeed. Can you talk about maybe one or two of the things you are doing, maybe a couple of the investments that you're making recently on this journey?
Sure, absolutely. So JTI is committed to making meaningful reductions to our greenhouse gases emissions by 35% from our own operations and by 40% from our direct leaf supply chain by 2030. So these are our commitments. By the end of 2020, so by the end of last year, we had already reduced our emission by 28%. So we're very well along the way to achieving our commitments. To meet the targets are reducing also our energy consumption and changing where our energy comes from through either on-site generation and the sourcing of third-party renewable energy. I can give you some examples in terms of we have a solar electricity generation system in the Philippines in one of our factories, which is the largest self-consumption rooftop solar system in Southeast Asia. Is producing a lot of electricity, and it kind of, because it's produced in excess, we're also providing this green energy to local communities. I can also give you a couple of examples that relate to the UK. And for instance, 100% of our UK company cars will be hybrid by the end of 2033. And once the infrastructure allows, our UK business plans to start transitioning to our fleet to fully electric cars. And also, we have already delivered 100% renewable electricity at our UK locations, and we are now aiming to reach 100% decarbonized total energy usage across our UK operations by 2025. So these are some of the key sort of examples that I can give you in terms of what we're doing.
Great, thank you, Anna Maria. Some exciting projects there. I love the sound of the Philippines ones, which sort of makes me think of another thought, which is, you said that the Philippines have been helpful in terms of, I guess, some subsidies or some support in terms of that solar scheme you put up there. What are the sorts of the best policies that you are seeing? Because, I mean, you've got a fantastic global view. And what are some of the best examples of policies that you are seeing to support you in your race to net zero? Or maybe what would you like to see if there aren't the best ones out there?
So as I mentioned when we started this conversation, I think that the sort of best legislation policies should really incentivize innovation from a business perspective, rather than, again, trying to levy taxes. Governments should not use climate change as an opportunity to actually get more taxes out of businesses, but they should be using this opportunity to incentivize businesses to look beyond what we have today and really looking for longer term solutions that we can all benefit from. I think the pace is also very important, because we've seen the acceleration of the climate change challenge that we're all facing. So I think we all should have a sort of sense of urgency, including governments, when they think about legislations or setting up policies. It's important that this is something that we do as soon as possible. Because there's really not much time left for us to be able to really contribute to climate change and to combat climate change. I think also once we will have workable and effective solutions, governments should find ways to also encourage the necessary behavioral changes when it comes to citizens, or, from our perspective, consumers. That's really important. Obviously, we all have a role to play here, but governments really are in a unique opportunity to be able to influence behavioral changes that are also very important when it comes to climate change.
Indeed, some great thoughts there, Anna Maria. And maybe finally, linking back to what Natasha said in her introduction, are you at JTI seeing pressure from your investors to accelerate and become net zero faster? Indeed.
I mean, our investors relation team is actually involving us more and more as a sustainability team in all of the conversation that they're having with our investors, to ensure that we're able to explain the work we do in sustainability, and to really explain quite in a detailed way also our commitments towards net zero, and what our plans are, and what our future strategies. So indeed, we're seeing these sort of interest that's been kind of really accelerating in the past few years, something that we had not seen, until kind of recently. So there is a renewed interest in really kind of understanding also the longer term commitment. So this is not like a short term conversation. It's really trying to address what are the biggest challenges that we face as a business from a sustainability perspective, and also trying to understand what are the strategies and the plans we put in place to make sure that what we say is actually supported by real actions from our side. So these are ongoing conversations that we have with our investors indeed.
Anna Maria, congratulations on everything you're doing at JTI to accelerate your journey. But don't go away. Stay here. One or two questions are already coming in, actually, and that's a reminder to all of you listening. Some great points there by Anna Maria. I'm sure it's given some food for thought. So please post your questions in the chat, and we'll come back to that when we've just heard from our next couple of speakers. And our next speaker, I'm delighted to introduce, is Niklas Gustafsson joining us from Sweden, and Niklas is Head of Policy, Public Policy and Regulatory Affairs at the great company of AB Volvo. We're of course all familiar with your company, and like many in the transport sector, have got this huge challenge of shifting from petrol diesel engines, I think predominantly in your case, to electromobility and maybe hydrogen too. So yes, fascinating to hear your journey, Niklas, and everything that you're doing. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Juergen, and thank you very much for inviting me to this important webinar today here. So yes, I'm with the Volvo Group then, and we are one of the largest producers in the world of commercial vehicles. So that means trucks and buses and construction equipment and also marine applications. We are approximately 100,000 people in 190 countries of the world, actually. So more or less everywhere. And you know us probably by the brand of Volvo then, of course, on trucks and buses and construction equipment and other marine applications, for instance, but we also operate Mack trucks and Renault trucks and some other brands within the commercial vehicle sector. Volvo Cars is not part of the Volvo Group any longer. Since 20 years back, actually, they are separate companies, but we share proudly the brand of Volvo then. So looking into the commercial vehicle sector and if you like, the transport community as such, and this huge shift that we are actually entering into right now, it's a lot of challenges, obviously. We are a sort of a diesel engine-based company since 100 years back, and of course it's a shift for sure, but from many different aspects. But before coming into that, I might also touch upon other big challenges that we also address then, such as digitalization and self-driving vehicles, for instance, which is a huge thing for trucks and for buses and for construction equipment, maybe a bigger thing, honestly, than for passenger cars. Because when it comes to the business case of self-driving vehicles, then you can immediately find the business case when you come to commercial vehicles, obviously. So we invest a lot in that. And that is also connected to the even bigger task then, and that is the race towards net zero emissions then. And this we address, as you say, Juergen, with different kinds of solutions then. If I start internally in this company, then what we are concentrating on in our own transition, it's of course closely connected to technologies and what we need to secure that our trucks are actually being propelled by going forward. And that is of course electricity, but we say electricity in two aspects. So a big part of the fleet going forward will be battery electric trucks and buses. We are already since 5 years back producing fully electric buses, and we are also now producing and selling quite a lot of electric trucks, honestly, battery electric trucks. It's a perfect application, especially starting in cities and city distribution and garbage handling and what have you, when you're talking trucks in urban areas. But also then for medium and long haul, we can see that the battery electric vehicles will actually play quite a big role, even in heavy duty trucks, honestly. But we can see then that from a technology limitation perspective, we need to complement this on the top, so to say, for the real heavy trucks. And that's where the fuel cells comes in and thereby also the green hydrogen. So from the trucking side, you will see now going forward, both battery electric and fuel cell electric trucks. And this is, of course, a technology task, which is quite big. And I have been myself in Volvo for the last 30 years or so. And I can see, you know, from a change perspective, I mean, what we're in right now and in the coming 5 to 10 years, it's actually changing the company in a way, quite a big way, honestly, because it's so much connected to technology shift for us then. But it's also connected then to the larger scope of the transport sector, and actually finding the system solutions in here together with our customers, of course, which are business to business, quite different actually from pass car side, which is more consumer products, and also with our customers then, the ones that really want to transport things over the globe, you know. So huge interest from them, huge interest from our investors, because the race is on, and it's a highly competitive industry, of course, the truck industry, and we are in a good position here actually in the lead of electrifying our trucks and buses, I might say, if I may. But the system is larger than that. We are engaging quite a lot then in partnerships also with the energy sector, of course, because we need that green electricity, we need that green hydrogen to really reach a net zero total. So we have committed ourselves to science-based targets, aiming for the 1.5 degree ambition in the Paris Agreement. And we are also teaming up with others to do the same then, and really try to build an ecosystem, not only with pledges and promises, but actually doing it for real, you know, and really securing that we have the charging infrastructure and that we have the green hydrogen out there, and so we are investing together with partners in the energy sector. We actually have a new business unit within Volvo that we call Volvo Energy, just to secure that the change is for real, and that we don't come into the chicken and the egg situation, which is of course an obvious risk here, but where we need the fueling stations for the green hydrogen at the same time when we are actually launching and start selling the fuel cell trucks out there. So quite a challenging thing. And if you compare the CO2 footprint for a company like Volvo, then of course we are also addressing in our science-based target the scope 1 and scope 2 and scope 3. What's interesting in here is that when it comes to scope 1 and 2, our production of our products and the energy we use for that, which we are shifting over to fossil-free production and only green energy and all that, that is only 1 to 2% of our footprint actually, since our products is running on fossil fuel during their whole lifetime, and it's for a truck it's quite a long lifetime and a long distance during that lifetime. So 99% of our CO2 footprint is in scope 3 then, and that's where our products in use, so to say, and that's where it's really important now to come to these system solutions, you know, quickly together. And even though we also invest in scope 1, I mean, incoming products, we are now investing to have fossil-free steel, for instance, in all our products. Very important stuff, but maybe even more important in other industries than it is in Volvo specifically. So that's a little bit where we are on our journey, and it's a lot about partnerships, honestly, and not partnerships just to sign a paper or two in front of the COP, but actually to sign papers with business in it and doing things for real. So
no, fascinating, Niklas, and I mean really quite unbelievable, isn't it? You know, the transition from, you know, fully diesel over to fuel cell electric and electric vehicles, total change of technology, huge shift. And then at the same time, also looking at your manufacturing processes and making sure that you're reducing the carbon footprint significantly there. I mean, amazing journey. Now, as you've already, I mean, you've said very strongly in your introduction, this all depends on partnerships. You can't do all of this on your own. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, you're going to rely on infrastructure to deliver green hydrogen, etc., etc. What sort of support are you getting to help you manage this sort of innovation transition? How good is the the innovation landscape in I mean, I know you'll be doing a lot of it in Sweden, but you'll probably be looking around the globe as well. How good is that support system out there, and is it good enough to help you on this journey?
Mm-hmm. I think I would like to put it like this, Juergen. You can divide that elephant a little bit in pieces, and the innovation system, if we start with the technologies and in the innovation around the technologies that we mainly develop in Europe, but also in US and India, we have really good support there, really good partnerships coming up, really good investments being done, even though it's a little bit who takes the first step all the time, right? So we are not standing in the corner waiting for governments to chip in funding or anything like that. Actually, we are stepping out, and we are even going that far that we team up with our competitors, which is scary, honestly, but we do that, and we invest. So for instance, with our main competitor out there, Daimler Trucks, we are investing together now in fuel cell development and manufacturing. So the fuel cells that you can find in some passenger cars out there today is a completely different animal from what we will need to see in heavy duty vehicles, just from a pure technology perspective. So that's what we do. We invest ourselves, and then governments come and support us. Since we showed that we are really doing it for real, we do the same in the charging infrastructure, actually teaming up with competitors to actually start building charging stations ourselves for heavy duty trucks, which is again very different from the charging points you find for passenger cars. So we said to the European Commission, for instance, that now we invest in the first 2,000 charging points for heavy duty vehicles that is needed. And then, it's there. Then we find the support, we find the governmental actors, we find both on member states and on EU level, and also in US and elsewhere. It's not really hard to find the support, in that ecosystem, but you need to be prepared to actually take maybe the first step yourself in there. So from a support perspective, I think we can find it. Then, the automotive industry is heavily regulated and has always been. So regulations is also part of the support, so to say, to push us in the right direction. And there we can maybe ask for a little bit more, honestly, because but it comes back, who is actually pulling who here? Is it governments pushing industry or the other way around? It's not easy for governments either to actually follow in the pace that we have on technology development. So sometimes it's a little bit mismatch there, but we do see the right policy packages and regulations coming up. So for instance, in Europe, the Fit for 55 package is really, really good, but it's a toolbox, and each and every tool in the toolbox needs to actually come through the whole government discussion system, which will take 1.5 years at least until we actually see it. And then we are at the stage now where we actually can't risk of losing one or two of these tools on the way, so to say. Then it's hard to say if we are actually getting support or not from a regulatory perspective. The most important one actually being the price on carbon, honestly, to really support the transition from the fossil fuels to the sustainable fuels, and energies. Then one of the more important tools is actually correct price on carbon to make our customers make the shift, honestly.
Thank you very much, Niklas. And I'm sure we'll come back to carbon pricing. And again, absolutely, fascinating what you're doing. And I think, you're absolutely spot on. Companies like yours need to take the lead, need to make the first step, and invest boldly, and then look out for the actors to support. And brilliant to hear, Niklas, that you feel like you are getting that support from through policy and through innovation agencies to support you you on your journey. Again, don't go away, Niklas, and audience, please do ask any questions of Niklas. I see a couple have already come in, which is great. And we're now going to move on, and I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker, who is Tom Howes, who is the head of Energy and Environment Division at the International Energy Agency. So we're going to get a slightly different viewpoint now, which is absolutely brilliant. Tom, you've had this sort of the inside corporate view, how JTI is managing its journey on decarbonisation, reaching net zero. You've had for a net zero journey. You've had from Niklas the story of, again, an inside view, but actually how that is also transitioning the whole of the commercial transport space to become net zero. So yeah, fascinating to hear your view from the International Energy Agency and what you think needs to be done to accelerate our journey. Over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Juergen, and good morning, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to be here today. The IEA, it's a different perspective on things. It's been great to hear the corporate plans, 3 different industries and 3 different developments. And it's really impressive to hear those on the ground, really the concrete steps you're taking to decarbonize. Here at the IEA, we're an intergovernmental institution, so our members are governments, and we provide advice to governments. And so we give a rather literally a global view of what needs to happen. Last week we produced our World Energy Outlook, which gives the sort of a hallmark of where we need to go. And this year we included a net zero emissions scenario, where we showed what the world would look like if it did follow a net zero pathway to 2050. And there, despite the good efforts that have been already illustrated this morning, it's very clear that there is an enormous gap between our current policies, even our current pledges, and how we need to get to net zero. There are changes just across all technologies, across all sectors that need to happen. And the billions or the hundreds of billions that we spend on investments in the energy sector today need to scale up into the trillions. So we're talking orders of magnitude change here, which needs actors at every level to take a role. Now we flagged up that it's good to see the pledges coming forth, both the corporate pledges and the governmental pledges. But those governmental pledges represent about 20% of the effort needed to decarbonize, to reduce emissions. If you look at where we are today, compared to, you add on the pledges that we've got, that takes us 20% of the way towards net zero. So there's a bit of a road to go, and we still need to see those governmental pledges. Hopefully there'll be some more made at Glasgow at COP26. But in the months following as well, we really try to build up a head of steam where everybody realizes that this is the direction of travel, and governments and the corporate world need to get on board and make those pledges. It's going to take major investment needs, and in that sense, if you like, the rich world, the world of the OECD countries is in a good position. We've already seen record budgets being developed for recovery packages. The trillions of budgets in the US, the EU's Fit for 55 and Next Generation budget plan, the UK budget plans. So public money has never been as cheap and as available as now, and this can be great as a starter pack, if you like, for helping to reorientate investments in grid, in public infrastructure, to reorientate the finance world as well, because these governments are also working with international financial institutions, whether that's the World Bank or the EIB, the EBRD. These banks as well are changing their orientation so that we're moving more towards a sustainable finance regime. So there are multiple ways in terms of direct government investment, in terms of government steering of the financial world, to reorientate investment in every sector. The UK presidency, COP presidency, is also trying to stimulate innovation and collaboration on innovation, just the sort of thing that Niklas from Volvo was talking about. The the need for breakthroughs in the power sector, in road transport, in steel, in hydrogen production. These are 4 priorities of the UK presidency to really try to get people to collaborate and work together in the near term, because these are 4 key sectors which really are needing a total reorientation. So there's a lot of talk out there. There's a lot of pledges being made. There's money coming forward in terms of public budgets and a reorientation in terms of policy, of the regulatory framework, and in the corporate world. But I'm particularly impressed to hear already the examples that we've had this morning of what's going in the corporate world. We try to keep tabs as well of what's going on there, because it has to be driven by the corporate world, even if we need the right governmental and regulatory framework. But already there are over 100 companies who represent large energy consumers or producing large energy consuming goods who've made net zero commitments. And they've gone to their shareholders and said, this is what our plan to achieve net zero looks like. This is how much it might cost us, and getting shareholders to sign up to it, and also taking the messages to consumers who are interested in seeing these kind of messages. And we see that it's happening across all sectors, in heating and cooling equipment, road vehicles we've heard of, electricity, cement. In the technology sector, you have major IT service providers switching to net zero goals. It's even happening in air and shipping logistics, and even in construction. But it has to happen all of these areas. I think the governmental framework is coming. There's a lot of it there already, but it's really impressive to see the first movers who've been presenting this morning. I think it's useful to have a governmental framework, but as Niklas said, you can't really wait for the government all the time to be the first mover. So it's impressive to see that the corporates are ready to step forward. I guess it's partly because they're getting a sense that they're no longer going to be stepping out in front, and the other penguins are still on the iceberg, not daring to move. I think there's a sense that we are all moving in the same direction now. It's really just a matter of time before everyone has to be there. And if that's the case, you should be first. There's plenty of advantages to being first when you realize that there's a momentum and an inevitability about the direction of travel. And I think that's where we're starting to be. So well done, all of the other panelists who've been coming forward, showing how they're stepping forward. I think there can be more of that. I think shareholders are increasingly expecting it. And I think doing that, it's also going to speed up the way governments respond. Governments feel more comfortable if they're able to provide that framework, whether it's on sustainable finance, on building regulations, on emission standards in transport sector, on providing the infrastructure. They'll also feel more comfortable about this if they feel that there's a momentum here, and it's ceasing to be quite as risky as it was perceived to be. So as that risk diminishes, everyone's more interested in it. The bankers will be more interested because the costs of capital will come down as the risks come down. So there's a momentum building up, I hope, and it's been great to hear these stories today. I hope there'll be more in the future. But that's the kind of discussion that's building up, and the signing of paper in Glasgow will be important because it adds to this sense of momentum, and that's what you need to be able to convince your shareholders to make these investments.
Yeah, indeed, Tom, great. And it is interesting, isn't it, that, here we're seeing, really 2 superb examples of corporates on their journey of net zero. Across the whole sort of decarbonisation world, it's still nowhere near enough. And I must admit, your figure of that government pledges are still only 20% of what is needed to aid this transition is actually quite staggering. And I'm wondering if you can just get a little bit more granular for us. And, so in what particular areas is that 80%? Is it all about innovation and technological boosts and support that is it needed, or where are we lacking that governmental support?
I guess one of the clearest distinctions to make is between the developed world, where there's cheap capital and plenty of it, and the developing world. and there's just a major mismatch in terms of availability and cost of capital, given that it's in the developing world that we're going to be seeing a massive, the stronger economic growth and the stronger emissions growth over the coming decades. So that's why one of the pieces of paper that really needs to get signed at Glasgow, and the UK government's working hard on it, is the pledging to get at least to the 100 billion a year pledging of support from the global north to the global south, and hopefully working on a higher target even above that for the future, because at the moment the investment that's available to OECD countries it's great. It's going both into existing technologies, so supporting the infrastructure adjustment that's needed for the much stronger penetration of renewables in the electricity sector, for instance. But there's also major R&D programs there. It's never enough, but it's starting to be developing the clean hydrogen programs, the working with CCUS and the development of a low carbon gas industry. So there's probably more innovation focus in the rich world. The developing world is still focusing on, look, we're still providing basic energy and electricity access to parts of our population. So we can't be involved in that high-end, very novel technology dimension yet. So in India, for instance, they're keen on renewables, rolling out the wind and the solar, because that's the available cheapest new technology that there is that's going to be helping them meet their capacity needs just to deliver new electricity to people who've never had it before. So there's that kind of dichotomy. A lot of it, a lot of the priorities around the world is the electricity sector, because that's where we're going to see the major growth. There'll be a decline over the decades in fuel consumption, fossil fuel consumption in particular. We see that declining in every sector, and the growing electrification of most sectors. So there's the clearest route is to renewables in the electricity production sector, but there'll be an electrification in building heating, moving away from fossil fuels. Obviously, we have experts who can talk to us about the growing electrification in the transport sector. There'll be some electrification of heavy industry as well, but that's one of the more harder areas, but it can happen there. So it's the trend is available in all the different sectors, but I guess that the big shift, the big gap is between what's going on in the developing world, where it's relying on currently available low carbon technologies, and that needs to happen in the developed world, but the developed world can also be the vanguard of the novel technologies, the technologies of tomorrow.
Yeah, no, very clear, Tom. So this gap between the developed and the developing world. So, I mean, my final question, and this is going to go to all of the panelists, and I think I've got your answer. So I'm going to allow you a second ask, Tom. Everybody else, I'm going to just say one ask. And the question is what is the one ask that you would have of either policymakers, governments, or indeed it can be of your own, it can be of corporates? What's the one ask, the one pledge that you're going to be looking for at COP26? Now, Tom, you've already said one, you want to see a much stronger pledges to support the developing world, very clear. That's one of your asks, but I'll allow you one more, and then we'll just quickly go around the panel, and then I'm going to get onto the questions from the audience, of which I'm pleased there has been quite a few. We might have time for one or two more if you still want to put your questions in. Tom, what's your second ask?
Every country would be capable of increasing their nationally determined contribution, their pledge, whether it's they sign up to a net zero or not. There's more that they can be doing next year. And the nationally determined contributions are for what every country is doing between now and 2030. So let's stop talking medium and long term. Let's start talking short term, what governments can be doing in the next 5 years to make sure that they're setting the groundwork for the corporate world to actually start moving rapidly along the road. And every country could be making stronger pledges and taking action in the next few years.
Totally agreed with you, Tom, and good shout. And I'm sure we'll come back to that theme as well. So quickly round the table, and I'm going to include you in this, Natasha. Your big ask, what it is you want from the leaders getting together in Glasgow in, I think it's less than 10 days' time now. Anna Maria.
Yeah, from our perspective, it's really to be able to contribute and to be able to partner across sectors and with international organizations to be able to really contribute and have our efforts recognized as well when it comes to being able to participate to broader stakeholder, multi-stakeholder engagement. Initiatives, I would think that, you know, this is something that we'd like to ask because, as I said, you know, our sector is a very controversial one indeed, but we do have a meaningful contribution that we're already working on and that can just help enhancing the level of our fight against climate change.
Great ask and great leadership, Anna Maria. Very much agreed. Thank you, Niklas.
Yes, thank you. If I'm allowed to be a little bit egoistic then, and not talking about Volvo or trucks or anything, but actually egoistic from the transport sector perspective, I would like to first, you know, support Tom in his input and actually to make a focus on the developing world. And when I'm talking from the transport sector perspective, I mean, it really makes sense to get this right from start or from the beginning here in the developing world and in developing countries. Because if it's one thing that we know connected to GDP growth, it is transport. I mean, if we succeed to transport people and goods in an efficient way, it is sort of a one-to-one connection to GDP growth. Of course, it needs to be decoupled from CO2 and other harmful things, including traffic safety, by the way. But it's important. So that's very important what Tom said there. Then if I would have one wish for Glasgow, with the transport sector in focus, it's actually for governments and for countries then to secure that their input in their NDCs going into this negotiation is actually following what they communicate in their own ambitions on, you know, shifting the transport sector into a sustainable transport sector. We have this, I mean, we are heavily regulated, as I said, and we have all these regulations all over the world. We have all these nice policy tools. We have the Green Deal. We have Fit for 55 in Europe and what have you. I'm not so sure that we can really see this being mirrored completely into the NDCs. And that's the trust that we want to find from industry in our policymakers. If we can see that our policymakers is actually putting their bets on the transport sector, then I'm talking about, on this shift that we are doing, then it will be, you know, then we will feel more confident in our own decision of actually making this big bet into this from our side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Niklas. Very clear. Don't just make the pledges, follow through on it, really believe it, and let's really make it happen, which ultimately gives confidence and gives confidence to investors to do that also. Very clear. And finally, Natasha.
So I want to echo a little bit of what both Tom and Niklas said, but I want to take it a little bit further, which is Tom very kind of eloquently brought out the point that we touched on right back in the beginning about the impact on developing economies and how difficult it can be for those economies to get the necessary investment to make the transition. And Niklas has talked about this as well. And from my perspective as a trade finance banker, I would love to see a stronger public sector response. I think it's already looking, you know, there is already a lot of movement, but we can always do more, very much to support those developing economies to make that transition, especially the sort of the most emerging markets where the strain is felt the greatest. And in my role, I see that strain every day playing out in practice. I do also want to make the point, though, that I would really like the public sector, even in the developed markets, to think about SMEs. and smaller companies. I think, you know, we're sitting here today with two of the largest and most sophisticated multinationals in the world. And, you know, Niklas made the point in his original sort of introduction about Volvo stepping forward and being, you know, in a position to take a leadership space in, you know, a leadership position in this space. But there's an enormous amount of global GDP sitting with SMEs, who many of them would really like to improve their carbon performance, would like to play their part in the transition, but they also do not necessarily have the kind of the capital firepower to do that. And there, I think there is really a place for the public sector to play. You know, at the end of the day, it is large corporates that are going to lead the way because they have the firepower to do it. But I would really like the public sector to think about those for whom it is more difficult. And that both means developing economies, but it means the smaller players in the developed markets as well.
Very, very good input there, Natasha, and again, totally agreed. And you know, sitting here in the UK, and Chris mentioned at the beginning about the Catapult organisations in the UK, of which I chair one, and the whole purpose of the Catapults in the UK is to help corporates engage with their supply chains and help small to medium-sized companies embrace new technologies that they otherwise maybe couldn't afford to or don't have the bandwidth to do, so that they can get on the journey of net zero at a faster pace. So let's just stick with that, because it is actually one of the questions that has come in, and indeed webinar 4 this afternoon is very much looking at exactly this question. The role of SMEs in net zero. And the question that's come in here said that as large corporates here, so as our JTI and Volvo, so this is to you, Anna Maria and Niklas, what are you undertaking, maybe with the help of organizations like Catapult, or, you know, I know you have organizations like this in Sweden, in Germany, you have the Fraunhofers, you know, what is it that you're doing to support your SMEs on their journeys? I don't know which one. Niklas, you're nodding, maybe you want to go first on that one.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, no, it's very, very important point, and it is a little bit of a challenge, of course, for large corporations to really nurture the ecosystem of SMEs. But it's there and it's growing. But we need to force ourselves a bit in the larger organizations to actually include the SMEs in a good way. Which we do then. We have all these innovation centers and SME support, and really trying to get them into the ecosystem of larger OEMs and on the transport sector as such. So it's not easy done. I fully agree on that. But wow, do we see innovation in there? I must admit, we can see so much more innovation in the SMEs than what we can actually come up with our 20,000 engineers ourselves. So we need them for sure. It's not a nice thing to have. We need the SMEs into our ecosystem for sure. So that's our way to try to not be the large corporate guys, you know, doing things ourselves.
Indeed. And do you have something like the Catapults or the Fraunhofers that enables you to sort of, you know, to do that bringing together of the actors? Do you have that in Sweden where you do your work?
Yeah, we have a concept in Sweden and in India and in France and soon in US as well, which we call CampX, which is a sort of an innovation arena. If I exemplify with the one here just behind me here in Gothenburg, what we do is actually not to, you know, just ship in money or you know, please welcome these SMEs and you can sit here. We actually mix them up with our own engineers. So the starting point is here in this building where we have approximately 600 people right now. 400 out of those is our own top engineers in electromobility, be it in batteries or in fuel cells and in self-driving vehicles, collecting all this data from the roads and analyzing and everything. And that's the base for collaboration with the SMEs that we bring in then. So that's the 200 of these people. Smaller companies, it can be two man or women company, up to maybe 100 people company and so on. And we try to mix it, but not only, you know, to make an incubator of some kind, but actually to mix them into our own engineering community. And it's not only for them to get access to our engineers and our skills and technologies, but it's also for our own engineers to actually change their culture of developing things. You know, they need to talk to the innovators out there as well.
Fabulous, thank you. And Anna Maria, your thoughts on you supporting your supply chains?
Yeah, so what we do in terms of our supply chain, because as any other business really is where we have the majority of our environmental impact really. So the value chain of our greenhouse gases emissions for the tobacco business is only around 10%. That is from our own operations. 90% of the emissions are from our upstream and downstream supply chain. So we work really hard to make sure that we help our suppliers to actually start their own journeys when it comes to environmental impacts and greenhouse gases emissions. We are proud to say that we have been recognized as a leader in engaging our supply chain in addressing climate change, really. And this marks our second recognition for the CDP Supplier Engagement Leader. So we've been recognized in 2019 and in 2020. And we also achieved in 2020 a place on CDP's A list for tackling climate change, as well as acting to protect water and security for the second consecutive year. This is really kind of some of our contributions towards ensuring that our supply chain, that we work with our supply chains and the kind of smaller players there, for them to be able to contribute. We have a great examples, for instance, coming from the UK, which is relevant to you, which is how we support our UK retail customers. We recently led and communicated a series of workshops for independent and convenience retailers on environmental sustainability, and the roundtables have led to peer-to-peer learning. So this, again, you know, on a smaller scale, but in a very relevant market for us, this is some of the work that we can facilitate.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Anna Maria. Now we've got quite a lot of questions in now, and I'm told we can run slightly on to 10:20, so we've got just over 10 minutes. So it's going to be very concise, sharp answers to incredibly complex questions, I'm afraid. And the first one of those questions, I mean, we've already touched on it, and maybe Tom and Natasha, initially your thoughts, and that's this about carbon pricing and carbon emission pricing. And the question here from Christine Obia Nordstrom is saying that, you know, carbon pricing is still very fragmented globally. And how do we make it more global, and how do we make it really, you know, a key catalyst towards the journey that we need to be on? Tom, I'm sure you'll have a view on that.
Oh yeah, I mean, my team here works on carbon pricing with countries around the world. We were working with China, and we now have the Chinese ETS, the biggest in the world, which is already providing signals, for, at least in the power sector, to become more efficient and to decarbonize. There's different things that can be done. I mean, there's a lot actually going on in countries around the world. We're also talking about carbon taxation reform in South Africa, in Indonesia, in Thailand, with Asian countries. So they're starting to get on board to this, and there's a wealth of experience there to actually leapfrog a bit and come up with good schemes that can work in the short term. And then also at one of the things that's happening in Glasgow is a discussion of the Paris Rulebook, including Article 6, which is all about creating the international framework for carbon trading, and getting back to a regime where there are credible, legitimate, non-dubious offsets and carbon trading regimes, which everyone can feel happy with, to provide. It's providing a revenue source to poorer countries. It's a cost-effective way of decarbonisation. So hopefully those discussions, those negotiations on Article 6 in the lead up to Glasgow and at Glasgow will bear fruit. So we'll have the international regime as well as the growth of domestic schemes. I think fragmentation, from an economist perspective, is not ideal. It's not as efficient as a one glorious global scheme, but it's really a case of not letting the best be the enemy of the good. And let's, if the schemes are fragmented, let's start with the fragmented schemes, and we can build from there.
Indeed. Well, good to hear, Tom, that hopefully there will be some output on this from Glasgow. So looking forward to that. Natasha, any thoughts from you on carbon pricing?
I mean, I think Tom kind of encapsulated most of the answer. I'll just add that, you know, I think whenever you have a fragmented system, you're adding to the costs for anyone who operates in multiple countries, you know, to the extent that different regimes have got, you know, different countries are operating different systems. You know, for the corporate of today, who is increasingly multinational, whether they like it or not, it just adds to the amount of work that's required to get familiar, to meet every requirement locally, to be able to kind of to meet all those requirements. And of course, it also creates the risk of arbitrage, where you don't want people to be, you know, looking to place themselves in places where, you know, they don't have, you know, carbon pricing or similar. So while I completely agree, and I add to Tom's point that, you know, we all hope that there will be more standardization coming out of Glasgow, you know, from a financier's perspective as well as an economist, you know, the sooner we can get to a standard, the better. And, you know, JP Morgan has a Centre for Carbon Transition, which provides advisory to clients. And I think this is a topic that's coming up more and more for corporates that operate in multiple countries.
Yeah, no, great, thank you. So let's move on to a very different but very, very important question, which is the consumer. And I certainly, you know, always remember this discussion when I was heading the company Siemens in the UK, and that is, you know, all the good things we're doing at decarbonising and ultimately making the product that we create or the service we create to be lower carbon. Does the consumer then really differentiate, and does the consumer use his purchasing power to support those companies that are investing more in this? It's a really good question. Now, Niklas, for you, I mean, for you, this is sort of your customers, maybe customers actually. But just wondering what your thought is on that. Are you seeing more of the consumer pressure?
Yes, we do, Juergen, absolutely. And it's actually very interesting to follow the different interests, how they evolve, if it's our customers directly or customers, or even the people like us going to the shop to buy milk or whatever. Does the transport cost influence at all? And that's actually connecting back then to the price on carbon. And honestly and openly, I would like to say that the price on transport, you know, it's not a big thing in the end product price for consumers. So that's actually why we believe that to make this transition, we should have a price on carbon for the transport sector, which again comes back to fragmentation a bit. Just a second on that. Yes, of course, as a global company, we would like to have a price on carbon all over the world for sure, but you know, fragmentation can also be in the other direction. For instance, the transport sector is not included in the current EU ETS, you know. So now we have a proposal on actually adding a separate ETS, which you can say is fragmented a bit then, but still it's needed because the cost of reduction of 1 ton of CO2 in the transport sector is much more expensive than it is in the current ETS system. So we simply need a higher price in that separate system on CO2, you know. So in a way that is okay. That is a bit fragmented. That is not included in the current ETS system. It's actually a separate one. So
thank you. Thank you. Okay, great. And the final question I'm going to take, and it's actually two questions that are in on this, and it's absolutely right that we address this issue, because we have been talking mainly about you know, decarbonizing both in your factories and of course in your operations, and in your case, Niklas, the whole of commercial transportation. But also incredibly important is the absorption of the carbon. So obviously we want to minimize carbon as much as possible, but in the end there is going to be some carbon, and it needs to be absorbed. And there's two questions. One is focused on, you know, what are you doing as corporates, what more can be done to help in your, you know, local ecosystems, where schemes are being done in countries so that they're done in an ecologically friendly way, so that there's good plantation, good ecology, etc. And then a second question is focused on the developed world, and what more can be done to support restoring forests. And a question from Anna Husen here is that providing credits for countries to be able to do that, as happened in Costa Rica. So any quick thoughts from you, Anna Maria, maybe from you, and Tom, I'm sure you'll have a view on this also.
Yeah, so we work very closely with our leaf growers. So as I mentioned in the beginning, we are a fully verticalized business, so we actually own parts of our supply chain. And from that perspective, we work closely with our leaf growers to make sure that we manage locally in developing countries our environmental impacts. And we also have a team that is specialized within the leaf organization, that is specialized in agricultural practices to make sure that we're able to contribute positively from that perspective. So this is something that we're very involved in and that we focus on very much from a business perspective. So these are some of the ways in which, we are giving a contribution, not only in terms of our supply chain when it comes to managers, our suppliers, but also when it comes to really our leaf operations.
Thank you very much, Anna Maria. And Tom, finally, your thoughts on this very important issue.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the question, I think, well, the question particularly for you is what more should be done from developed countries, and indeed it could also be, of course, from corporates in terms of supporting more CO2 absorption capacity, so reforestation and those sorts of activities.
Well, I think I think in your opening talk, you flagged up the issue of collaboration, whether that's collaboration between developed world governments and developing countries, or whether that's corporate collaboration. There's multiple opportunities for sharing the kind of practice, whether that's setting up the credible regimes for reforestation. If you're talking about using existing technologies and creating better carbon sinks, there's the technology side where the hard to abate sectors, particularly heavy industry, whether that's in the developed world or developing world, needs to get serious about clean low carbon gases and the use of CCUS. But there's multiple ways we could be using existing platforms that are out there, or creating new ones if they don't exist, to bring the different to make collaboration easier, to bring the experts together. We do a lot of that through our technology networks and our technology programs. But every corporate office, you talk of the big corporates who are multinationals, they've got national offices in all the countries they operate in. They too can be a source of outreach and collaboration to foster that kind of development.
Thank you very much, Tom. And on that, I'm sadly going to have to close it. But what a brilliant discussion it's been, and fantastic leadership, I think, shown here from the finance sector, Natasha, from the corporate and industrial sector, Niklas and Anna Maria, and Tom. Thanks for your challenges and the support you give to make sure that governments and policies and regulators are much more ambitious and supportive. Great food for thought of what we all, as business people, as corporates, as investors, as policymakers, need to do, and what is absolutely clear, that we're on a journey, but my goodness, there's a lot more to be done. It's been a great discussion. Please thank all of my panel in the usual virtual way, which nobody has worked out what it is yet. And with that, I say my thank you and hand back to you, Chris Southworth, Director General of ICC UK, to close our session. Thank you very much, everybody.
Well, thanks very much, Juergen. Thank you to our speakers. What a terrific session. Thank you to sponsors, supporters, and our audience today for all the questions and chat going on. This is such an important subject. I'll be posting the takeaways from the session on LinkedIn, so keep an eye out for that. And then our next session, we'll pick up on the conversation around SMEs. That's a super important point, talking about how we leverage the power of SMEs. And that kicks off at 2 o'clock British Standard Time. So we'll look forward to picking up the conversation there and welcoming you back to the International Trade and Prosperity Week. Thank you very much, everybody.